Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. If I can get rid of this feedback, my apologies to my listeners. Yesterday, before we concluded, we were talking about Francis Xavier and his Jesuit mission in Goa and in Japan, and we'll continue where we left off yesterday. We'll back up just to the beginning of the paragraph where we concluded yesterday. This is these stories of miraculous occurrences surrounding Francis Xavier and Ignatius Loyola are used by the Jesuits to deify the Jesuit order and to make them, as it were, gods upon the earth. And that's how they are venerated in the Roman Catholic Church, and particularly what's important to you and me, they're venerated that way by Roman Catholics in our government. And that's why they're so quick to adopt the instruction and the direction of their Jesuit handlers at Fordham and Georgetown universities in the United States. And that's how they are making America Catholic, by legislation, by uniting church and state in this country. This is the history of the Jesuits we're talking about, particularly Francis Xavier and his missionary works in the East. He says, R.W. Thompson, the author, and by the way, the title of the book is The Footprints of the Jesuits. We're beginning the first full paragraph on page 163 if you're following along. He says, one would suppose that the gift of tongues, when once conferred upon Francis Xavier, remained with him, inasmuch as he could not convey his thoughts to the multitudes of people in any other way. But, strange to say, it was otherwise. This miraculous gift was a mere, quote, transient favor, unquote, conferred only for a season during his intercourse with some of the heathen populations of India, and withdrawn as miraculously as it had been given. What strange infatuation it must be to accept it as true that after he had been divinely endowed with the faculty of preaching to the people of India in their own languages, he should have entered upon his mission to Japan without any knowledge whatsoever of the Japanese language. Although that language is one of the most difficult in the world and wholly unlike any spoken then or now in Europe, yet that fact was of trifling consequence to such a man as the Jesuits represent Francis Xavier to have been. He undertook his mission as if nothing were in the way, relying, as may be inferred from the Jesuit accounts, upon his miraculous powers to convert to Christianity an idolatrous people he had never seen and of whom the world at that time knew but little. It is solemnly averred that in 40 days, yes, 40 days, he acquired a sufficient knowledge of the Japanese language to translate into it the Apostles' Creed and an exposition of its meaning by himself. With this, he began to preach and, quote, converted a great number, unquote. Still, the intensity of his zeal made him impatient, and being unwilling to wait the slow process of appealing to the intelligence of the Japanese people, he resorted again to the familiar expedient of miracles, which had accomplished so much in India. Accordingly, we are told, quote, by his blessing, a child's body, which was swelled and deformed, was made straight and beautiful. And by his prayers a leper was healed, and a pagan young maid of quality that had been dead a whole day was raised to life, unquote. The Jesuits have never hesitated to assign to Francis Xavier, as they did to Ignatius Loyola, the performance of some miracle when anything had to be done that could not be accomplished in any other way. The aggregate number of miracles attributed to them, that is, Francis Xavier and Ignatius Loyola, exceed all that are recorded in the Gospels. And neither Francis Xavier nor Ignatius Loyola ever hesitated to avow their authority to perform them, in verification of the Jesuit doctrine that God had transferred his divine attributes to each of them. So this is what is believed and taught both by the Jesuits and those surrounding them, that the Jesuits are a divine institution, bequeathed by God with miraculous power. I call it sorcery. I call it lying, as does R.W. Thompson. But these miracles, I believe the Jesuits are deceiving the members of the government of this country, proving by whatever means some divine attributes, some divine sanction, some divine purpose. And that's how the governments have, the Jesuits have so much power in our government. I mean, it worked in Japan, didn't it? It worked in India. It has worked all throughout the history of the Roman Catholic Church, these so-called miracles, which can't be proven. They're simply a way to justify the blasphemous claim that the Roman Catholic Church is the one holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church outside of which there is no salvation, that it is the Church of Jesus Christ and the only Church of Jesus Christ, and the rest are error and rebellion against the true authority of Christ on earth, the Pope and the Jesuits. Now, he continues, he says, such recitals about all these miracles, such recitals are calculated to tax the patience of enlightened readers of this day. But without them, it's not possible to obtain accurate knowledge of the record the Jesuits have made up to inform the world of the glorious achievements of their society and to keep out of view the enormities for which they have been, in the course of their history, condemned by every Christian nation and people of Europe. So again, R.W. Thompson's focusing on the necessity of these so-called miracles to offset the odium that spread all throughout Europe against the Jesuit order. These miracles happening in India and Japan and other places in the East, outside of the vision of its European critics. And it says they are necessary also to a proper understanding why Francis Xavier was beatified and canonized. For these and other kindred fables were held to be sufficiently attested to cause his name to be enrolled among the saints. Okay, they use these stories, these fables of miraculous healings, raising people from the dead, and the miraculous ability to speak in foreign languages to deify and to canonize and to make saints of these Jesuits. Now it says the difficulty of conveying to the minds of the Japanese people any proper idea of God when their language contained no word to express it has already been suggested with regard to India. He told them, says Butler, that Deus meant God, but it is impossible that this or any other single word can so signify the deity as to convey to an ignorant, idolatrous people any just conception of the Creator of the world, or of His divine attributes, or of their own responsibilities to Him, either in life or death. But the wonderful exploits of Francis Xavier were not balked at this or any other point. The gift of tongues, the quote-unquote gift of tongues, and the author puts this in parentheses, or in apostrophes, only because he knows them to be a lie. He says the quote-unquote gift of tongues had once been given to him, whereby he was enabled to preach to any people without any previous knowledge of their language. This gift, however, as we have seen, was only a transient favor, a quote-unquote transient favor. In other words, He had it, and then he didn't have it. The obvious thing is he never had it, and he obviously couldn't demonstrate this ability to anybody with a scrutinizing ear. And it says, this gift, however, as we have seen, was only a quote-unquote transient favor granted for a season or some special occasion and taken away. And notwithstanding in consequence of this, it had become necessary that he should learn the Japanese language in 40 days so as to be able to speak and write it, and still became necessary also that he should again have the power conferred upon him to understand and speak all languages. Consequently, we learn from Butler, the historian, and by the way, who is friendly to the Jesuits, quote, at Amaguchi, God restored to Francis Xavier the gift of tongues, for he preached often to the Chinese merchants who traded there in their mother tongue, which he had never learned, unquote. So he miraculously learns to speak the Indian language, and then the Japanese language, and now the Chinese language. Now, look, before I'm criticized by my listeners, I believe in the gift of tongues. God granted the ability for the apostles and the new converts to Christianity at the day of Pentecost to testify to foreign languages, to foreign people in Jerusalem. They testified the gospel, okay? They weren't promoting any particular sect. They weren't promoting the Jesuits or anybody else. They were promoting Jesus Christ and Him crucified. The gift of tongues is a miraculous manifestation of the Spirit of God for a specific purpose at a specific time. It served its purpose. And I don't even deny that God could use this same gift for the purpose of spreading the gospel. Anytime He chooses, He's sovereign. But does it still go on today as it did in the day of Pentecost? I don't believe so. And I particularly do not believe that Ignatius Loyola or Francis Xavier or any Jesuit has the miraculous gift to speak in an unknown language and to interpret an unknown language, because they are not of God. Flat out. And I make no apology. The Roman Catholic Church is the synagogue of Satan. The Pope is the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist. And the Jesuits are the emissaries of Satan himself, the militia of Satan himself. Now, people might recoil at this, but I've done years and years of research into this, prayerful research into this, and I make no apology for my claim. If they have any miraculous power, it is not derived from the Creator of all heaven and earth. It is not derived from the God of the Bible. Now, Butler again quotes, he says, at Amaguchi, God restored to St. Francis the gift of tongues, and he preached often to the Chinese merchants who traded there in their mother tongue, which he had never learned, unquote. To appreciate the character of this statement, it should be borne in mind that at that time he had never visited China. And it is proper to observe that notwithstanding this providential preparation for missionary labors in that country, he never did visit there. So the question is asked, if it was a divine mission, if it was indeed sanctioned by God, if indeed Francis Xavier had been given this miraculous gift to be able to speak in foreign languages, and particularly in this case, the Chinese language, why is it that he never set foot in China? He died before his mission to China. Did God make a mistake? That's what's implied here. I mean, you can either believe that God made a mistake, or you can believe this whole account by the Jesuits is baloney. And it is baloney. If God had a mission through the Jesuits to China, they'd have accomplished that mission. Francis Xavier would not have died before the mission. Now, the author continues, it converts serious things into mockery to pretend that God transferred this gift to Francis Xavier in order to fit him specially for the conversion of the Chinese, and yet that he so disposed his providence with reference to him that he was never able to enter that empire or to hold direct intercourse with its people. If it had been the divine decree that he should be set apart for this work by this miraculous preparation, no earthly impediment would have been likely to arrest him or keep him out of China. For God's fixed purposes are not subject to fluctuation to suit the exigencies of human affairs. But notwithstanding, he made several earnest efforts to get there. He signally failed in all of them. He returned from China to India, and after remaining a short time at Goa, resorted to the expedient of attempting to enter an entrance into China by indirect means, because the authorities there in China were inimical to the Portuguese. He conceived the idea of procuring the organization of a diplomatic mission and having himself attached to it, so that by this indirect means, he could enter the country. This plan having failed, he endeavored to accomplish his object secretly, says Butler, by making the effort to be landed somewhere upon the Chinese coast, quote, where no houses were in view, unquote. In other words, so he couldn't be witnessed. And it says, every step he took, however, proved abortive, and he died before reaching China, thus leaving wholly unaccomplished what the Jesuits alleged was the foreordained purpose of providence. The Jesuits teach that Francis Xavier was on a divine mission commissioned by God, given the miraculous signs of speaking in tongues to verify this divine mission, and it wholly failed. Francis died before he entered China. This brings the whole thing to question. And any right-thinking Christian person looking at the history of the Jesuits and the claims that are made can come to no other conclusion but this so-called mission was a Jesuit mission. It wasn't a divine mission. Now, the death of Francis Xavier occurred in 1552, and his remains were taken to Goa about 3 months after, when, according to the Jesuit account, his flesh, quote, was found ruddy and flesh-colored, like a man who was in sweet repose, unquote. When it was cut, the blood ran, they said. And so necessary is it deemed by the Jesuit that his body shall appear to have been absolutely incorruptible, as an argument to prove that their society is under the special protection and guardianship of God, it is seriously affirmed that, quote, the holy corpse exhaled an odor so fragrant and delightful that the most exquisite perfume came nothing near it, unquote. They're trying to deify Francis Xavier, to demand that the world believe that God has granted this divine right and authority to the Jesuit order through these miraculous happenings. And it says, when the body reached Malacca, a pestilence then wasting the city suddenly ceased, and the effect alone of its mere presence, the mere presence of the dead body of Francis Xavier stopped a plague in that city. It's believed and taught even today about the Jesuits. It says it was transported to Goa, quote, entire, fresh, and still exhaling a sweet odor, unquote, and deposited in the church of the Jesuit college he had dexterously obtained from the Franciscan monks, which, by the way, was by intrigue. It was theft. And it says, upon this occasion we are told that, quote, several blind persons recovered their sight, and others, sick of palsy and other diseases, their health and the use of their limbs, unquote. See, they're trying to deify that even his dead body performed miracles equivalent to those of Christ. And it says his relics, that is, his dead body, by the order of the King of Portugal, were visited in 1774, 192 years after his death, when, quote, the body was found without the least bad smell and seemed environed with a kind of shining brightness, and the face, hands, breast, and feet had not suffered the least alteration or symptom of corruption, unquote. Now, it sounds like the Scripture says that his body would not see corruption. This is Jesuit fable. But don't forget, as incredulous as it is to you and me, it is believed by some of the most powerful people in our government. And here's another thing, too. If there is any doubt in their mind, they don't dare express it. And they must prove in their belief in these miraculous happenings and the divine providence placed upon the Jesuits. They must so believe this that they use their political offices to promote their legislation. Now it says, in view of the universal experience of mankind and the enlightenment of the present age, it's difficult to treat the foregoing statements seriously. They are so palpably the product of Jesuit imposture. And yet they are published in this country and recommended as positive truths by the highest ecclesiastical authorities, as if some intelligent providential object would be accomplished by believing them. Notwithstanding, however, that every man of common sense will reject them, they are indispensable to a proper understanding of the methods employed by the Jesuits in setting forth the claims of their society to providential favor. And although the vagaries of the wildest enthusiasts are more credible because they do not sport with sacred things, their recital puts us in possession of some of the means of unraveling the nets this wonderful society, the Jesuit order, has cunningly woven. Very artful description of the entire pretense of the Jesuit order. R.W. Thompson is trying to tell us something. He's very artful at it, and I hope my listeners appreciate what R.W. Thompson is teaching us about the history of the Jesuit order and the warning to the American people what will happen if they gain control in this country. We'll be back right after this.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. It's my pleasure to be here every morning, and I ask for nothing in return but your prayers, your heartfelt, effectual, and fervent prayer for God's protection and provision as we continue in His service. But what I ask for First Amendment Radio is some financial support. First Amendment Radio sponsors this program. First Amendment Radio absorbs the cost of production of this program, and I couldn't afford it if I had to pay for it. I'm just a little country bumpkin out here in the middle of nowhere, and quite, not very wealthy, to put it mildly. And I just pray that God would impress upon your heart to help support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors this program. Now we'll continue with the Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. So far in the book, we've covered the Jesuit machinations, intrigues, abominations, wars, calumniations, every kind of Jesuit horror in France, Spain, Portugal, Germany, England, India, Japan, and now we're going to move to Paraguay. And I remember when I first read the accounts of the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay, I came to the conclusion all to myself that the Jesuits are converting the United States into just a giant Paraguayan reduction, a Paraguayan-style reduction. Now, for the listeners who don't know anything about the reduction, the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay, you're about to learn about them. And as I read about these villages that were managed, run by the Jesuits in Paraguay, you'll recognize the similarities between the Paraguayan reductions and what the Jesuits have accomplished in this country. And being struck with the notion, all of a sudden, that the United States is simply a continuation of the experiment that the Jesuits launched in Paraguay, I called Eric John Phelps and posed the proposition to him. Well, as you might imagine, it was nothing new to Eric John Phelps. He'd been researching the Jesuit orders for nearly a quarter of a century. And he obviously had come to the same conclusion. And when I said, Eric, the United States appears to me to be simply a giant Paraguayan reduction. He said, yeah, that's it. If you've ever talked to Eric John Phelps, he gets real excited when somebody finally comprehends. And that's how he replied. Of course, my imitation of him is pretty bad, but he was giddy that someone else had independently come to that conclusion simply by reading the history of the Jesuit order. As with every example that we've given so far in the book, France, Spain, Portugal, Germany, England, India, and Japan, the Paraguayan reductions are instructive as to what the Jesuit aims and modus operandi is for this country, the United States of America. And I just beg my listeners, and I ask God to help me read this so as you can perfectly understand what the Jesuits had done in Paraguay. I pray God's gift to be able to read this to convey the information in this particular chapter of the book, to impress upon my listeners the similarities between the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay and the conditions that currently exist in the United States of America. We are under Jesuit influence and control in this country, and this chapter demonstrates it as much as any other chapter in this book. Now, beginning chapter 10 of the book, it's entitled In Paraguay. R.W. Thompson says the Jesuits had a fairer and better field for the display of their peculiar characteristics and for the successful establishment of their principles of their Constitution during the existence of the government founded by them in Paraguay than ever fell to the lot of any other society or select body of men. It is not too late to try them by the results that they then achieved, so as to assure ourselves of what might reasonably be expected if the modern nations, and I'll just insert the word, if the United States should so far forget themselves as to allow that sad and disastrous experiment to be repeated. Okay? We're going to get from R.W. Thompson a description of the government established in Paraguay by the Jesuit order as an exercise, an education to see what would follow if the Jesuits did the same thing in the United States of America or any other modern nation. Now, first of all, we would think that whatever the Jesuits did in Paraguay was simply because they accomplished because the people were ignorant and weren't able to see or comprehend what the Jesuits were doing. Well, the same ignorance is demonstrated here in the United States. And the enlightenment that we get from this chapter has the potential to open the eyes of God's people in this country and hopefully to achieve the same result, that is, the ouster of the Jesuits from this country. He says, after the Portuguese obtained possession of Brazil, remember, Brazil was already in existence before the so-called God of this world, the Pope, sent the missionaries of Christopher Columbus and the Portuguese, the Spanish and Portuguese explorers to discover the quote-unquote New World. God created it a long time ago. God discovered it a long time before the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist in Rome discovered it, right? So there were people living in South, Central, and North America, and Canada, and most likely Alaska, before Christopher Columbus ever tipped his sails this direction, right? It says, after the Portuguese obtained possession of Brazil, They inaugurated measures necessary to bring the natives under their dominion. So we're talking about a takeover here. And it says the problem was not of an easy solution. The Indians had no conception of the principles of international law, which the leading nations had established to justify the subjugation of the weak by the strong, and consequently had to be brought by slow degrees under such influences as should persuade them to believe that their conquerors were benefactors and not enemies. So first of all, we have to understand that international law is a result of the papacy. God created the nations sovereign and independent, but international law blurs those distinctions, don't they? And the papacy is the one who started international law, because he claims to be the governor of all the nations of the world, right? So it's an imposition of Roman Catholic canon law. And what was the purpose of this international law? So that the strong nations of the world could overtake and subjugate and enslave the weak. So who are the strong in this case? The Europeans, the Jesuits, the Roman Catholic explorers of Europe. And who are the weak? Why, those in this hemisphere are completely ignorant about their design to govern and control the whole world by force, if necessary. Okay, the United States is as much included in the machinations of the Roman Catholic Church to become enslaved to the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, the so-called God of this world, the Pope, through international law. And once the international law has placed its grip on this country, then the only thing left is the union of our government to the church, that is a union of church and state, to make that control absolutely complete. These same things were taking place in South America before the colonies were even thought of. He said, having to do with the enslavement of the natives of South America, it says the problem was not an easy solution. The Indians had no conception of the principles of international law, which the leading nations had established to justify the subjugation of the weak by the strong, and consequently had to be brought by slow degrees, under such influences as should persuade them to believe that their conquerors were benefactors and not enemies. The United States has, by the same slow degrees, been overthrown by this same Roman power. And we, by these slow degrees, have come to recognize, whether we know it or not, come to recognize this power as a benevolent power and not a hostile one. And that's where our error lies. We regard them as benefactors and not enemies. As a matter of fact, we would like to ecumeniacally reunite with them, wouldn't we, under Vatican Council II? So the same subtleties that Satan used in the garden to deceive Eve were the same subtleties that they used to deceive the Paraguayan Indians, is the same subtlety they've used to deceive Americans, who were once proudly Protestant, who protested this hostile foreign power, but who just want peace and unity now, willing to just surrender and no longer view this horde from Rome as an enemy, but as a friend and a benefactor. Now, the pretense of title, get this, the pretense of title based upon the grant of Pope Alexander VI, the Borgia Pope, remember, one of the most absolute wicked of all popes of all time, the pretense of title based upon the grant of Pope Alexander VI was not openly avowed. In other words, they didn't tell the Paraguayan Indians that the Pope claimed title to their land as the replacement of the Son of God on earth, the one who says, I am King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and I own the world, lock, stock, and barrel. The earth is mine and the fullness thereof, and claims through all these machinations to be the heir, the divine heir to the world, who has who claims for himself legitimate title of the air, the water, and the land. They could not openly avow. This Pope Alexander VI, the Borgia Pope, one of the most wicked popes in world history. We read about him in the book In the Pillory by John Bond. Some people criticize me for reading pornography on Inquisition Update, but it's history. Okay, it's the history of this particular Pope, Pope Alexander VI, claimed title to Brazil. And not only that, he claims the same title to the United States of America. The papacy claims the same title to the United States of America. But they couldn't openly avow this. In other words, they couldn't confess to the Paraguayan Indians, the ignorant Paraguayan Indians, that the Pope was simply asserting his title over their land. Because had they done that, even the most ignorant of them would have raised up in arms and slew every European that set foot on their shores, right? So it was imperative that they kept secret what the Pope's plan was, not only in Paraguay, but in Brazil and all of South Central America, Mexico, the United States, Canada, and Alaska, the New World. Now, if it had been, the native population, in all probability, would have united in sufficient numbers to drive the invaders into the sea. The same could be said of the people of the United States of America. If they could ever comprehend that there is indeed a union of church and state, our government united with the Roman Catholic Church, slowly by degrees, enforcing the Pope's title on this land, the natives of this country, you and me, and the Indians who were here even before us, would rise up and beat them back to the sea. But nobody dare tell us, because we're a force that cannot be reckoned with. So they keep the people ignorant. And those people who are responsible for your welfare, your spiritual welfare, and your temporal welfare, neither one of them will tell you about this. That's your government, the mainstream media, the alternative media, and even your most beloved Protestant pastor. He won't tell you about it. Why is that? The question must be asked by my listeners. Why hasn't this history been given to us? If it had been exposed that the Vatican was simply imposing its title to the land upon the Paraguayan Indians, the native population, in all probability, would have united in sufficient numbers to drive the Roman invaders into the sea. It's the most closely held secret in the world. And you would think in this enlightened age, by a nation of people who think they are free, would be interested in this information. They would somehow find some interest in this information. The author continues, he says, pacific means of some sort had to be employed so as to delude the multitude of natives into a condition of apparent but false security. Oh my God! I mean, it's hard to tell that he's not talking about the United States of America, but he is talking about the Paraguayan reductions. He is talking about these ignorant native Paraguayan Indians. He says pacific means of some sort had to be employed so as to delude the multitude of natives into a condition of apparent but false security. He said Spain had also acquired possessions in other parts of South America, and the methods of colonization adopted by the two governments were substantially the same. Charles V of Spain and John III of Portugal were both religious fanatics. You know you're in trouble when your king is a religious fanatic, especially if he's a Roman Catholic religious fanatic, which these were. Remember, the Protestant Reformation had only just started during this time. It says, Charles V of Spain and John III of Portugal were both religious fanatics, and although their chief purpose was to obtain wealth from the mines of America, each of them professed to desire at the same time the civilization of the natives. In other words, they're going to Christianize the natives. But their primary concern was their gold, and their silver, and their copper, and their precious stones. It's still the primary concern of the Vatican is the natural wealth in the Americas. I mean, we've all been told, even in our dumbed-down history books, of the explorers, the European explorers. Of course, it was never revealed that they were driven by the Roman Catholic Church, but the explorers to this country who explored the whole country, made alliances with the Indians, who showed them, said, show us your gold. Okay, so they took them out and showed them all the gold. They knew where all the gold was. Now show us where the silver is. Now show us where all the fur is, the pelts. You know, the queens and rich ruling elite in Europe just love raccoon skin hats, right? And mink stoles, and all kinds of furs and diamonds and rubies and emeralds and oil. They just love oil, but nothing surpasses their greed for gold and silver. Okay, Rome's desire for the riches of this country is what motivated the missionaries, the Jesuit missionaries to this country. And, of course, at the same time, they could claim to have civilized the natives of this country by bringing them Catholicity, the Catholic religion. Now it says, hence, as this could not be accomplished without the influences of Christianity, in other words, the civilization of these natives, all the expeditions set out by them to the New World were accompanied by ecclesiastics. That's right, priests, and were therefore under the patronage and auspices of the Church of Rome. That's right. They never do anything without the Church, because the Church is paying the bills for all their expeditions, right? Who do you think covered the cost of Francis Xavier in all of his missionary work prior to going into Paraguay? Well, it's the Roman Catholic Church. After all, she claims the world is hers. And it says the controlling idea of the period was that the church and the state should remain united, so that whensoever the latter should obtain temporal and political control, the former should be constantly present to decide and direct everything pertaining to faith and morals. That is, to keep both state and the people in obedience to the church. Okay, what we're talking about is papal monarchism. The Pope rules the government rules the people for the Pope. The Pope is the supreme, unquestioned authority, and the government is the servant of the Pope. It's the woman riding the beast of Revelation chapter 17. The woman is the church. The beast is the temporal governments of the world. They're going to do an unmolested, uninterfered with experiment of the optimum union of church and state in Paraguay. The Jesuit experiment, a complete, hermetically sealed union of church and state in Paraguay. And it says, with these objects in view, missionaries were sent out by the church, and the first Spanish and Portuguese adventurers and every step was avowedly taken in the name of Christianity. So deeply was this sentiment embedded in every mind that the memory of some favorite saint was perpetuated in the names of nearly all the newly established cities. This is a defining characteristic of Roman Catholicism. When they could conquer a land, they began renaming all the cities after their so-called saints. San Jose, San Clemente, San Salvador. They name St. Augustine, Corpus Christi, San Francisco, San Diego, all over the United States. St. Louis. That's how they stake their claim. They name cities after their idolatrous, blasphemous saints to whom they pray. It says, so deeply was this sentiment embedded in every mind that the memory of some favorite saint was perpetuated in the names of nearly all the newly established cities. It says, these missionaries were taken mainly from the ancient monastic orders, the Dominicans, the Franciscans, etc., and had been regarded by the popes for many years as not only the most faithful, but the most efficient coadjutors of the church in the work of extending Christianity, that is, the Antichrist religion, all over the world. We have elsewhere seen that the Jesuits did not sympathize with this belief, and that Ignatius Loyola had urged upon the Pope the necessity of creating his new society upon the express ground that these ancient orders had become both inefficient and corrupt. So R.W. Thompson is not going to let us forget that Ignatius Loyola has a very, very selfish aim in these Paraguayan reductions, just like he had a very, very selfish aim in the United States Jesuit reductions. And I'm so sorry to have run out of time at this particular moment in the reading of this book, but we'll return here tomorrow and pick up where we left off, comparing Paraguay, the Jesuit Paraguayan reductions, with the Jesuit reductions in America. Interesting subject. I'll see you tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.